we go. All right. I'm going to wait a few seconds so that it can do its thing. Anyway, so as a gift, I have received my dream book. So I got cat hair in my mouth. So this is Under the Oak Tree by Suji Kim, and this is volume 1. I have not read this yet. It is I have not read the full book yet. So this is the very first time reading this on here. Has, again, beautiful book. That is on the pages. Okay, so this is Under the Oak Tree. I'm going to read the back of the book first. Most fairy tales end with a wedding and a happily ever after, but this is no fairy tale. Lady Maximilian is the daughter of the powerful Duke Croyso, and she is rarely allowed outside her family's sprawling castle for fear that her stutter will tarnish their noble name. When she is forced to marry Sir Riftan, a lowborn knight caught in one of her father's schemes, Maxi doesn't dare hope for happiness, let alone love. Her stumbling communication and his gruff manner sour their relationship before it can even begin. And Riftan leaves without a word the morning after their vows are exchanged. Now 3 years after their disastrous wedding night, Riftan has returned as a war hero. To Maxi's surprise, despite rumors that he was offered marriage to Princess Agnes, a beautiful and renowned sorceress, Riftan still wants Maxi for his wife. And when he comes to claim her, his desire bewilders Maxi, even as she is overcome by the scorching heat that Riftan's presence ignites within her. As she learns to navigate the intricacies of her new life, Maxi will find herself and her courage and discover that she is anything but powerless. This is the updated and official translation of Under the Oak Tree, the #1 web novel on Manta. This volume collects chapters 1 through 76 of the original web novel by Suji Kim. So Under the Oak Tree by Suji Kim. Even the inside is just gorgeous. Look at this. So we've got volume 1. Under the Oak Tree, the novel, volume 1 by Suji Kim. We have a note from Suji Kim. I love this note. This note speaks volumes to me. To my readers, this story grapples with many difficult and complex themes. The content includes depictions of physical and mental abuse, as well as themes of trauma and emotional distress experienced by the characters. Certain scenes may be disturbing and triggering for some readers. Reader discretion is advised. The story also contains explicit sexual content that may not be suitable for all audiences. Please approach this content with care and seek support if needed. For any readers who see themselves in this tale, my hope is that it provides you with comfort, courage, and the knowledge that you are not alone. Suji Kim. We have a map. I know it's very hard to see. For the first few chapters, the only thing that you really have to know is this is the Duke of Croyso's castle here in Wedden, and over here is Anatole. And you will learn about those soon. Chapter 1. Maximilian Calypse paced around the drawing room. She was so nervous that she did not realize she was biting her fingernails. Not until the Duke of Croyso entered the room. The clack of his heavy cane shattered the silence, and she rushed to hide her hands behind her back. "Have I I not told you time and again to cease that revolting habit of yours?" The Duke's words were like a biting chill, and Maxi fixed her eyes on her foot. Forgive me, father." The Duke clicked his tongue disapprovingly. "You'd best not embarrass me, girl. You have been far more fortunate than you deserve. Should your repulsive behavior besmirch our family name, know that I will not forgive you." A cold sweat formed on Maxi's back, and an icy bead trickled down her skin. She opened her mouth to try to form a smooth reply, but her spine stiffened with fear, choking her words. I shall do as you command, father. When he comes, I will. Maxi did not have to raise her head to know that her father was grimacing at her. Disgust shadowed his face whenever he heard her speak. She tried to remain calm, even as she scrambled for words. I will persuade him to stay in this marriage. Enough. The Duke rapped his cane on the floor. Is it too much to ask that you speak normally for a day, for even just an hour? Can you think of any man who would want a stuttering wife? As you are well aware, Riftan Calypso is no longer just a lowborn knight. He is now revered as one of the best swordmasters on the entire continent, as the hero who defeated the Red Dragon Sector. He need only ask, and the church would rush to annul this marriage. The Duke paused to catch his breath. He pressed a palm to his temple, as if the mere thought of divorce scandalized him. I will not allow the eldest Croyso daughter to be divorced by a lowborn knight. I will not stand idly by while my half-wit daughter ruins the reputation of this house. Maxi bit her lip, unspoken words burning her throat like bile. It's not my fault, she wanted to say. Neither she nor Riftan had ever expressed a desire to be wed. It was her father and her father alone who had willed the marriage to happen. The Duke continued his tirade, lips snarled in rebuke. If only you were half as beautiful as Rosetta. No, if only you were normal. Then I would not have to grovel at that lowborn's feet to humor his every whim. Maxi's half-sister Rosetta was like a rose in full bloom. At the mention of her, what little defiance Maxi had mustered slipped from her grasp like water through her fingers. She had turned deathly pale, but her father was relentless. King Reuben may wish to make Riftan Calypso his son-in-law, but there is nothing he can do if Calypso refuses. If only you had managed to win your husband's affection, you would not be facing a divorce. You have no one to blame but yourself. But he left for the campaign the day after the wedding. Maxi had hardly had a chance to talk to Riftan, let alone win his affection. But just as she was about to give voice to that protest, her vision flashed white as her father slammed his cane into her side. The pain was so severe that she curled over, gasping for breath and unable to scream. "How dare you talk back to me?" the Duke demanded. "Just thinking about your wretched impediment is enough to infuriate me." Maxi nodded in desperate submission, lest he strike her again. The Duke's lips twitched, as if he was readying himself to spew forth another stream of vitriol. A knock at the door saved Maxi. The Duke spun to face the sound, and he was addressed by the meek voice of a maidservant. "Your Grace," she said, "the Red Dragon Knights have arrived." "Show them in." Maxi's face flushed with terror, and she finally raised her gaze to meet her father's. The Duke hissed through gritted teeth. "Make it very, very clear to Calypso that the marriage will not be annulled, and a reminder, should you have forgotten, if you bring shame upon our house, you will have a price to pay." The Duke stormed out of the room. When she was sure he was gone, Maxi slumped against a window. She tried to slow her breathing as she waited for the throbbing pain to subside. The light of the autumn sun streamed in through the window, and Maxi blinked back her tears, Crying would only serve to drag her deeper into the abyss, where her sorrows would consume her. Maxi clasped her shaking hands together. She had to collect herself. For a noblewoman, divorce was akin to death. Not only would she be ridiculed, but she would also disgrace her entire family. It was an unspeakable dishonor, and a duel was the only path to redemption. But a duel against Riftan Calypso? The Duke of Croyso had no sons, and none of his relatives or sworn knights would stand the slightest chance against Riftan. He was a sword master who had felled a dragon. Who could possibly match him in combat, let alone best him? It seemed inevitable that she would tarnish her family name. The Duke would never forgive her. It was possible that he would even kill her with a timely accident before the annulment was complete. Such machinations were not beneath her father. I must do all I can to prevent something like that. But would Riftan Calypso listen to her? Maxi bit her lip. She was trapped at the edge of a sheer cliff, with no way to safely descend. After all, her marriage had been arranged solely for the convenience of the Duke and his knights. 3 years prior, when news spread across the continent that Sector the Red Dragon had awoken from its slumber, King El-Neuma, Reuben III, called his vassals to arms to embark on a campaign to subdue the beast. Duke Croyso and his forces were bound by law to participate, but he had found a way to shift his duty to Riftan Calypso by marrying off his daughter. Maxi shuddered, recalling her wedding day. The air had been thick with thinly veiled insults whispering among the guests. As a lowborn knight, Riftan had no choice but to obey the Duke and appear at the wedding hall. Just how much resentment had he felt? How humiliated must he have been? That day, Maxi had been terrified of Riftan's expression. He had looked as if he was holding something back. If I were half as beautiful as Rose, could I have won his heart? Such thoughts deepened Maxi's torment. Riftan Calypso was a stunning man. Even Rosetta, who often mocked his humble origins, could not help but blush when she saw him dressed in his order's ceremonial attire. Riftan could have courted any woman he wanted. How could he possibly be attracted to a plain, stuttering woman like her, especially now that his accomplishments had elevated him from his lowborn status? Now that he's likely to marry a princess, pleading won't be enough to change his mind. The night after the wedding was their only night together. Riftan had left for the campaign the following morning, without saying a word, and he never wrote to her once while he was gone. Maxi was not sure if he even saw her as his wife. She buried her face in her hands, dark thoughts clouding her mind. "What a sight you are," said a familiar sullen voice. Startled, Maxi looked up. A giant of a man glowered at her from the door. She hadn't heard him enter. A wife trembling in fear while awaiting her husband's return from mortal peril. Riftan's voice drifted with sarcasm, and he approached her with slow, silent footsteps. Dressed in silver armor and a navy blue tunic reminiscent of a monk's robes, Riftan was far more powerfully built, far more intimidating than Maxi remembered. She held her breath as he drew closer. "I didn't expect a warm welcome, but do you have to tremble as if I'm carrying the plague?" His frigid tone snapped Maxi out of her trance. As she realized that she had managed to displease him within mere minutes of their reunion, the blood drained from her face. I am relieved to see you unharmed." Maxi's voice trailed off. What else could she say? She was not even sure how to address him. Riftan? Too intimate. Sir Riftan? He would surely mock her. Unsettled by his piercing gaze, she took a step back. Why was he looking at her like that? Riftan's face hardened further as she retreated from him, until he grabbed her arm and yanked her back. His words came in a threatening whisper. "At least pretend you're happy to see me." Maxi froze. Their bodies were close, too close. The potent undertones of leather, horses, and sweat filled her nostrils, and the overwhelming maleness of his scent unearthed memories that she had kept buried for the past 3 years. A curious heat radiated from his muscular body, and his eyes seemed to pierce straight through her mind. On that day, he had looked at her the same way, like he was a hound ready to gorge on fresh meat. Maxi ducked her head, ripping her gaze away. Her face was burning. There was no stopping the torrent of memories that now flooded her mind. Memories of that night washed over her, engulfing her, the sensations as vivid as yesterday. Trigger warning. Take off your clothes. Maxi regarded her new husband with apprehension. She was perplexed. When the wedding feast came to its end, her nursemaid had led her by the hand to the bridal chamber. After her maidservants bathed her, they left her alone, and she was sitting on the bed when he entered the room. Unable to gauge his intentions, Maxi just stared at him wide-eyed. She could not comprehend why the man who had ignored her during the ceremony would make such a sudden demand. She was vaguely aware that unspoken things happened between wedded couples in the privacy of their bedrooms, but no one had ever told her the details. Her nursemaid had impressed upon her that she must follow her husband's commands. She was to remain still, no matter what he did. But removing her clothes was not one of the commands she expected, and she was to obey without question? Riftan Calypso pulled his tunic over his head, shooting her an impatient look as he stepped closer. Must I remove them myself? Maxi gasped at the sight of him. The muscles in Riftan's body were like cords of steel, and his shoulders were twice as broad as hers. His neck was long and thick, and his chest tapered into a taut, slim waist. Maxi had heard that Riftan was a giant, even among the knights, but to see him standing before her eyes was overwhelming. Her mouth went dry. A few blows from her father were enough to cause her unbearable pain. Would she survive it all if a man like Riftan decided to strike her? You look like you'd just seen a monster, said Riftan. Maxi flinched. His tone was frosty, and he crossed the distance to the bed with a single stride. Fixing her with an interrogating stare, bathed in the warm glow of the fireplace, his body gleamed bronze. It completely filled her vision. Do you find me undesirable? He leaned over her. 2 black eyes embedded in a nearly flawless face, glinted frighteningly. His mouth clenched shut, twisted into a cynical smile. How could I, a lowly knight, ever please the proud daughter of a duke? The contempt in his voice sent a shiver down Maxi's spine. She was at his mercy. If he wanted to, he had the right to flog and subject her to the cruelest of punishments. Realizing that she had earned his scorn, she broke into a cold sweat. Come, fulfill your marital duties. Maxi wanted to ask what those duties were, but the question never left her lips. She fixed her gaze on his feet as his body cast a dark shadow over her. A long, calloused finger reached down to lift her chin. There was something subtle in Riftan's gaze, something she could not read. A marriage is annulled if it isn't consummated, he said. Do you wish to leave me? She trembled uncontrollably. At any moment, she might drown in the dark depths of his eyes, but he only sneered. Speak now if you want me to leave. I won't stop once we begin. Maxi's tongue clung to the roof of her mouth. Her father would never forgive her if she let him leave. She had never had any choice in this matter. She squeezed her eyes shut and began to unclasp her belt with shaking fingers. She feared her father's retribution far more than what shame she would suffer at the hands of this strange man. Should Maxi fail him here, her father would not stop at a mere beating. He would punish her brutally, and in a matter of days she would find herself back in this very room. facing a different knight. To her father, she was nothing more than a tool. Maxi removed her jewelry piece by piece and set them next to the bed. A suffocating silence hung between them, punctuated only by the crackle of wood burning in the fireplace. Riftan's gaze bore into her as she pulled down the straps of her linen dress and removed her arms from the frilly sleeves. The cold night air lashed at her bare back and shoulders. Not daring to expose herself further, she stopped and clutched the dress to her bosom. But before she could hesitate further, Riftan knelt on the bed and pulled her dress down. Wait! The dress slipped off of her body before she could stop it. She clutched desperately at her skirt, even as Riftan's impatience grew more palpable. Keep your hands away. Why are you pulling? She gazed up at him, her eyes wide with confusion. His face was concealed in shadow, silhouetted against the light, and she couldn't make out his expression. It intensified her fear. Do you want me to leave? Riftan asked. Make up your mind. Maxi stifled a sob. She reluctantly lowered her hands, and the dress slid to her waist. Riftan pulled it down further and flung it to the floor. There's no turning back now. His deep voice chilled Maxi's heart. As his rough, warm hands caressed her tense body, she pushed him away instinctively, only to end up more firmly in his embrace when he locked his arm around her waist. Skin pressed against skin, and his body exuded an unfamiliar heat. For reasons Maxi could not explain, the heat made her shudder. Not so close. He carried on as if he had not heard her stammering plea, and leaned forward to press his lips to her breast. Maxi's eyes widened in shock. Warm lips sweeping across soft skin. A shiver coursed through her body at this unfamiliar sensation. As he buried his face in her bosom like a newborn babe, her mind went blank. Relax. With his calloused palm, he stroked her back, now paralyzed with fear. His damp breath left goosebumps in its wake. Rubbing his chin on her soft skin, he slid a hand under the garment that covered her waist. His touch here startled Maxi, and her lips quivered. She had never imagined that a man would one day intrude on this region of her body. Well, what are you? Stay still. It will hurt if you don't warm up. Maxi's legs were caught in a helpless struggle. She had only ever exchanged a few greetings with this man, and now here he was, casually touching her most intimate parts. But please, don't. She grasped his thick shoulders, pleading with him. It was now his turn to quake and shiver. Her hands burned when she touched his firm, smooth skin, like she had wrapped them around a red-hot iron. Riftan's lips twitched, but instead of words, Maxi received a rough kiss. He tasted of something savage and untamable. She was still trying to make sense of what was happening when he removed the last piece of clothing from her body. She cried out in protest, but even that was quickly swallowed up in a kiss. Damn it. Riftan let out a series of curses and moans, while Maxi gasped for air like a fish out of water. He was encroaching on parts of her that she had never even known she had. She thrashed her legs, but they were soon weighed down by the bulk of his unyielding body. She was trapped like a helpless animal, caught between the jaws of a wolf. Damn it, I can't hold back any longer, he muttered to himself impatiently, and his fingers entered her deeper and deeper still. Maxi's breath was lodged in her throat. She had long forgotten her maid's instructions about dutifully submitting to her husband's will. Under his touch, her body twitched and jerked, and she gasped helplessly, overcome by unthinkable sensations. No, don't! Oh! Her struggles and protests were useless. There was no chance of escaping his searing mouth and rough caress. She clutched at the pillow under her head. She could not believe that something so grotesque was happening to her. Her eyes burned and her mind twisted and turned, tossed in an impossible storm. What's happening to me? After what seemed like a lifetime, Riftan's hand stopped. This will hurt a little. Maxi sank into the bed, her limbs hanging limply as she tried to catch her breath. Her body had been so tense that it was now drained of strength. She was no longer capable of struggling. Riftan undressed completely and wrapped an arm around Maxi's waist, lifting her up. Their warm bodies touched. Only then did Maxi realize that they were both slick with sweat. His back shone reddish gold in the dim firelight. It reminded her of the time she snuck into a goldsmith's workshop and watched as they cast statues out of molten gold. Was this how it might feel to have bubbling metal poured over her? Her entire body was melting away, as if submerged in a crucible of liquid gold. Take a deep breath. Riftan's voice had become so husky that it was hard to decipher his whisper. His lips grazed her earlobe, sending chills down her spine. Holding on to his sinewy arm, and without thinking, Maxi allowed her legs to open. Riftan promptly paired his hips with hers. Ah! Maxi cried out, startled. Before Maxi could grasp what had happened, a dull pain radiated through her lower body. She struggled, terrified of the unfamiliar feeling. Riftan weighed her body down with his own to stop her from breaking free, and he nibbled at her lips. Her breasts pressed flat against his rugged chest as he entered deeper. Close to tears, she scratched at his arms. It hurts. Too tight. Too tight, he says. Droplets of sweat trickled down his neck and dripped onto her face. As she writhed in an attempt to flee, he quivered slightly and secured her waist with both of his hands. A deep line creased his forehead. Just stay still. Hurts. It hurts. Don't move. Damn it. Ugh. Riftan's body trembled, and Maxi held her breath as he crushed her in an embrace. As if unable to hold back longer, he began moving rhythmically. Each thrust produced a sharp pain that drew faint moans from her throat. Maxi's body rocked like a boat on stormy waters. Her mind sank into miry depths, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the sheets. What was he doing to her? Damn. Riftan released a strangled moan and collapsed over her. His body radiated so much heat that his sweat threatened to turn to steam. Panting, Maxi allowed her gaze to drift to his shoulders. Like hers, they were rising and falling in rapid succession. A strange sense of emptiness enveloped her, and eyelids aflutter, she stared blankly at the ceiling. What had just happened to her? Why are you crying? Riftan asked. Maxi hadn't realized it, but her cheeks were wet. She tried to cover her face, but a warm tongue slid across her skin, tracing away the tears. He cupped her cheek so that she could not turn away. Don't look away from me. Riftan spoke the words through clenched teeth. His dark eyes flickered with intense emotion, and the hairs on her nape stood straight. He pelted her tear-streaked face with kiss after kiss. You're my wife now, he said between kisses. There's no turning back, whether you like it or not. A hand reached into her hair and pulled her lips to his. There was little she could do but allow it to happen, again and again. When Maxi awoke the next day, it was well past noon, and Riftan had already left for the dragon campaign. She learned from her nursemaid that a cleric had come to inspect the blood on the sheets and declare the marriage valid, and that this consummation of marriage was a rite of passage for all newlywed couples. And that was all that had transpired between her and Riftan back then. Nothing more, nothing less. She had lost her virginity, and he had left for the Lexos Mountains in the Duke's stead. It was difficult to believe that they were man and wife, even now, at this moment, as he stood before her returned from war. Lost for words, Maxi stared silently at Riftan's face, his expression like a storm. Her ears rang with the echoes of her father's voice, threatening her with a myriad of punishments should Riftan Calypso divorce her. Her lips, however, were sealed shut. What could she possibly say? He was a stranger, her husband in name only. Let me get a drink. Oh, well, hi, Francis. How are you? For heaven's sake, stop shaking, Riftan snapped, voice raised. Maxi flinched and took a step back, but he tightened his grip on her arm and closed the distance between them once again. Do you find me that horrendous? Have I come back a monster? He ran a hand through the thick, shaggy hair that covered his eyes and glared at her. Maxi's vision blurred. Far from achieving her goal to persuade him not to divorce her, she had instead managed to offend him in less than 5 minutes into their reunion. Her lips twitched. I need to say something. Anything. Please. I was nervous, and I didn't know what to say. Her cheeks burned red with shame. Tears welled in her eyes. But this wasn't the time to cry. Doing so would only enrage him. She searched desperately for the right words. You're not a monster. I'm just nervous, and can't stop shaking. Maxi's tongue was failing her even more than usual, and she could not bring herself to meet Riftan's gaze. It had been hopeless from the start. How could she possibly persuade him when she was hindered by this dreadful impediment? The burning flush rose from her cheeks to the tip of her ears. She hung her head in shame, overwhelmed by a sense of vulnerability. Perhaps she would be better off keeping her mouth shut. A proper woman would not stutter and shake like a half-wit. Damn it all, Riftan muttered. She flinched at his quiet cursing. Her father was right. There was not a single man in the world who would desire her as his wife. Asking him to turn down a princess's hand in marriage in favor of her would be ludicrous. Overcome by her helplessness, Maxi's eyes prickled with tears. At that moment, something cold touched her cheek. Riftan had reached out with his gauntleted hand to cup her face. Open your mouth. Unable to grasp his intentions, she gazed numbly into his jet-black eyes, hovering a hair's breadth away from her own. Riftan sighed, as if his patience was being tested yet again. He pushed her chin down and thrust his soft, wet tongue into her mouth. Shocked, she found herself gripping his arm to steady herself. Riftan bit his lip and muttered in annoyance. Should have taken off my armor first. It happened so quickly that Maxi had no chance to brace herself. She stood there uneasily until he pushed her down onto the sofa behind her. With a knee pressed into the side of her thigh, he deftly removed his silver gauntlet. The long, thick fingers that emerged from the gauntlet tenderly grazed her cheeks. Her hands clutched his tunic, as if they had a mind of their own. Again, Riftan pressed his lips to hers, and he removed the other gauntlet to bury his other hand in her hair and roughly grasped the back of her head. Riftan's tongue twisted and tangled with Maxi's, roving over her teeth. She found it harder and harder to breathe. She shoved at his chest, but he clung more firmly to her. Just a little more. Her heart skipped a beat at his pleading tone. Warm hands slid over her face and neck, stroking the curve of her back before sliding along her ribs and up to her breasts. When Maxi squirmed in embarrassment, he pulled her in by her waist and laid her down on the sofa. Then, without delay, he pulled up her skirt. Riftan! This time, she immediately knew what he wanted. Her eyes darted towards the door. How could he do this in the middle of the drawing room, and in broad daylight, no less? Someone could burst in at any moment. But Riftan didn't seem to care. He nibbled on the back of her neck, pressing his body insistently against hers. When she felt his hardness between her legs, she cried out in shock. He began to rub against her, slowly, and with each movement, the steel cusses that covered his powerful thighs brushed up against her, the cold metal raising the hair on her skin. Unable to bear it any longer, Maxi squeezed her eyes shut, but the intimacy abruptly ended when Riftan sprang up without warning and threw a cloak over her body. Someone was watching them. A blond man dressed in the same armor as Riftan stood at the door, his eyes wide and mouth agape. "What are you looking at, you little rat?" Riftan roared. Maxi leaped to her feet, startled by Riftan's shout. as much as by the man at the door. For a split second, the blond man was taken aback by the intensity of Riftan's ire, but he was soon growling a retort. Commander, how could I have known that you'd be engaged like this in the drawing room? I assumed you'd hear me approaching right away. As usual. I didn't see the need to knock. Get out. Riftan's bellow turned Maxi's face white as a sheet. She dreaded what was to come if the blond man left the room, so she sent a pleading look in his direction, but he simply cursed through gritted teeth and turned back towards the door. A carriage is waiting for you outside, Commander. You said you didn't want to stay a moment longer than necessary at Croyso Castle. Keep it waiting, said Riftan. The blond man paused, as if struck dumb by Riftan's words. Then he scowled and let out an exasperated sigh. Please be quick, Commander. With that, he shot a displeased look at Maxi before exiting the room, the door slamming shut behind him. Maxi searched Riftan's face for signs of anger as he scratched the back of his head. When his eyes slid away from the door and back to her, Maxi withered under the intensity of his stare. Riftan scoffed. I won't pounce on you again, so there's no need to tremble like that. Hell, I wasn't planning to jump on you here at all. She dared not raise her head. Instead, she stared at her clasped hands as if trying to bore a hole through them with her gaze. Riftan rose from the sofa and straightened out his disheveled clothes. You heard him, didn't you? A carriage is waiting. It's leaving soon. Maxi's blood froze. He had tried to ravish her only moments ago, and now he spoke of leaving? She hadn't managed to convey even a single coherent thought to him, let alone persuade him. But, in her panic, Maxi clutched at his tunic, oblivious to how rumpled her own clothes had become. Could we talk for a moment? There's no time to lose, said Riftan. Have a servant pack your things. We'll talk in the carriage. Maxi had been shaking with fear, but now she was confused. She hesitantly repeated his words. My things? Yes, your things. Do you not have things to bring with you? She blinked, still not understanding. Riftan sighed heavily and deftly adjusted her clothes back into some semblance of propriety before calling to the maidservant waiting just outside to pack Maxi's bags. Despite all of the evidence unfolding before her, Maxi could not believe that Riftan truly intended to take her with him. Pack only what you need. We can't dally for too long. There's not much to take. Just a few... Good. We'll leave now, then. Anything you might need, you can find at my estate. Riftan sent the maidservant away and led Maxi out of the drawing room. She almost had to run to keep up with his massive strides. Everything was moving so quickly that her thoughts could not keep up. Your estate? What, does it amaze you that a lowly knight would have land of... What, does it amaze you that a lowly knight would have land of his own? He glowered at her over his shoulder, his voice brimming with scorn. King Reuben bestowed an estate upon me when I became a knight, along with the castle. A castle that should have become your home after our wedding. Maxi looked up at him, bewildered. A castle that should have become her home? Riftan seemed uninterested in explaining further. He was already marching down the staircase and into the expansive courtyard beyond. Next to the colossal fountain stood an extravagant carriage pulled by 4 horses. An entourage of 15 or so knights stood guard around it. Their boisterous voices died down when Riftan and Maxi approached. Some of the men threw furtive glances at Maxi, who followed awkwardly behind Riftan. Her cheeks burned under their curious gazes. What are you waiting for? Riftan asked her. Get in the carriage. But father is waiting for me. I need his permission. Riftan's face hardened when she mentioned the Duke. Tightening his grip on her arm, he dragged her towards the carriage. You are my wife. Why must I seek anyone's permission to take you with me? Your father has no right to interfere. With that, he lifted her up and placed her in the carriage, where she sat in mute astonishment. My wife? Jumbled thoughts filled her head over those 2 words. Could this mean Riftan did not intend to divorce her? Go, Riftan shouted out the carriage window as he sat down across from Maxi. The carriage rattled to a start, and soon Croyso Castle shrank into the distance. It was unbelievable. Maxi had imagined dozens of different scenarios as she prepared for their reunion. This was not even close to being one of them. Why is he taking me with him? She stared, dumbfounded, at her husband. He was calmly taking in the passing scenery, with one arm draped over the windowsill. Was this really the same man who had showered her with blistering remarks and kisses before marching out of Croyso Castle, dragging her along with him? Maxi recalled her father's words. King Reuben has offered him the princess's hand in marriage. He will not let such an opportunity slip by. Duke Croyso was the one who had drilled those words into Maxi's head. But he was not alone in assuming that Riftan would marry Princess Agnes. She was a renowned sorceress who had fought alongside Riftan in the campaign against the Red Dragon. 2 warriors falling in love after sharing the thrill of the battlefield was an irresistible source of inspiration for the bards, and they wasted no time in composing ballads of the romantic tale and performing them throughout the city. Everyone had anticipated a royal wedding after the princess's and the knight's victorious return. Maxi herself thought a divorce was inevitable. Even the cleric who officiated her marriage to Riftan would have agreed. Everyone knew that Duke Croyso had strong-armed Riftan into marrying her, and Riftan had every right to demand a divorce. So, why? Maxi stole a glance at Riftan's finely sculpted features. Tousled hair crowned his chiseled forehead, and it rippled in the gentle breeze that blew in through the window. His lustrous golden-brown skin lent him an exotic appearance, and though the arduous campaign had etched a forbidding edge to his naturally stony face, his handsomeness hadn't eroded in the slightest. Maxi had never seen Princess Agnes in person. Rumor had it that the princess was remarkably beautiful, with golden hair and deep blue eyes. If Riftan and the princess stood together, they would probably look like a work of art. She turned to her reflection in the carriage window. A broad, round forehead, a small, low-bridged nose with a dusting of brown freckles, large, round eyes that seemed to throw her features off balance, wavy red hair twisted into a single braid, stray strands sticking out like pieces of straw. Maxi could only think the worst of herself. It was impossible that Riftan really wanted her as his wife. There had to be a catch, a secret scheme, perhaps. What was he planning to do with her? As if he sensed her misgivings, Riftan whipped his head around to look at her. Shrinking before his piercing gaze, Maxi averted her eyes. She must have done something to displease him, for he began to curse. Am I so unbearably repulsive? At least try to hide your disgust. You're stuck with my company whether you like it or not. I have no intention of leaving this carriage. You aren't repulsive. I never said. Then do something about that dreadful look. Maxi's hands flew up to cover her face. It was true that she felt uncomfortable, and it was true that his presence scared her, but she hadn't realized that her expression so openly betrayed her feelings. Knowing that she had angered him, she struggled for the remedy. Just what kind of expression should she wear? Riftan sighed. You must realize that we're not like other married couples. Cold sweat beaded on Maxi's forehead. I don't know much about you, he continued, and you don't know much about me, but you are my wife, and I'm to spend the rest of my days with you. How can I treat you as my wife if my mere presence makes you tremble like a leaf in the wind? The rest of your days with me? His features twisted into a frown. We were married 3 years ago. We are man and wife. Are couples not supposed to live together for the rest of their lives? She looked at him as if he had suddenly grown another head. She could not believe her ears. Did he genuinely want her to be his wife? Or was he lying for the sake of some ulterior motive? Perhaps he was mocking her, thinking that she had yet to learn of his engagement to the princess. Increasingly distressing thoughts tore through her mind. I may be a man of low birth, but I hold the vows of marriage sacred, Riftan snapped in frustration. It astounds me that the daughter of a duke would show such contempt for our vows. Contempt? If not contempt, then what is it? You married me, yet you've disregarded my existence all this time. Do not expect me to tolerate that any longer. Dismayed, Maxi stared at him. How could he accuse her of such a thing? He was the one who had left without a word the morning after their wedding. I've never disregarded you. You're the one who... Enough. As Lady Calypso, you should have left for my estate immediately after our wedding. Yet for 3 years, you chose to remain in your father's opulent castle. Riftan snorted. Then again, how can I expect the daughter of a duke to give up her high standing for the life of a near widow, forced to await the return of either her husband or his corpse? Taken aback, Maxi could not think of a retort to his accusations. His words were utterly incomprehensible to her. How could I have left for your estate? I didn't know where it was. You didn't tell me anything. Enough with the lies. Before I left for the campaign, I made every preparation I could for you to come and live on my land. In the event of my death, you would have inherited the estate. A duke's daughter may not care for such a paltry piece of land, but it's a place I hold dear. It was your duty to be there, but you neglected it. His eyes blazed with anger. He did not seem to be lying. There was no reason for him to invent such a tall tale. Maxi swallowed hard against her nerves. I didn't know. You didn't say anything. My men told me that you refused to leave, he said, his voice bitter. So spare me the excuses. For 3 years, I've known precisely what you think of me, and... Why are you trembling, damn it? Are you afraid I might beat you? I'm sorry, truly. I knew nothing of it. I awoke that morning to find you gone. No one ever told me. He narrowed his eyes as if to assess the veracity of her words. Like a prisoner awaiting judgment, she braced herself for his reply. When he spoke again, a few moments later, it was in a softer tone. Even if that were true, you should have left for my land. A wife's duty is to take care of her husband's house. If that didn't occur to you, I can only assume that this marriage is worthless to you. Again, she could think of no reply. Their marriage was not as meaningless to her as Riftan imagined. Still, it was true that she had not wholeheartedly accepted the arrangement. She had simply thought of them both as victims of her father, and their marriage an unavoidable sacrifice. Had Riftan been sincere about their marriage all along? What were you going to do if you were pregnant? Pregnant? Maxi raised her head, jarred by the unexpected word. The corner of Riftan's mouth twisted. It was a possibility. I performed my duties to the fullest that night, didn't I? His sardonic tone drained her face of blood. To Maxi, the events of their wedding night remained a harrowing and shameful memory. She was now aware that every marriage required consummation, but that did not change anything for Maxi. She still trembled when she recalled what he had done to her. Riftan, however, spoke casually of their wedding night as if it had all been a trivial affair. Maxi shuddered with renewed dread. Riftan's face contorted into a scowl, and he slammed his fist into the wall of the carriage. Don't make that face! As if the thought of having my child sickens you. Something cut him short, drew his attention away from her and to the window. With one hand on the hilt of his sword, Riftan leaped out of the carriage, his fierce growls morphing into action. Maxi screamed as a knight in their escort bellowed a warning. Commander, ogres! I know. Cast a shield over the carriage. After shouting his orders, Riftan turned to Maxi. Whatever happens, do not come out. He slammed the carriage door shut without waiting for an answer. A thunderous roar shook the ground, and Maxi clapped her hands to her ears. Thud, thud. As the earth shook, so did the carriage. Maxi curled up into a ball on the floor, averting her eyes from the window. She had heard rumors that monstrous creatures had been spotted near the dukedom, but she hadn't expected to encounter some within an hour of leaving Croyso Castle. She was terrified, stricken by the thought that one might soon attack her. "Stop that ogre at once!" A voice rang through the chaos outside. The carriage rattled violently. The knight's cries and urgent shouting mixed with the eerie shrieks of something inhuman, echoing frighteningly through the air. Maxi buried her face into her skirt. Thump. Thump. Something struck the carriage, and Maxi looked up, fearful that the ceiling would come crashing down on her. Then she started in shock. An enormous eye, green and bloodshot, stared at her through the window. Maxi screamed as she stood, pressing herself against the opposite side of the carriage. The world turned upside down, and her body fell backward as the door flung open. She tumbled out of the carriage and crashed to the ground. Pale with terror, Maxi scrambled to her feet, but her legs were paralyzed with fear. She looked around for help, desperately, but the others were all busy fighting the ash-skinned ogres. She would have to find her own way to safety. She began crawling towards the carriage, just as an ogre lumbered towards her, pounding the earth with its enormous feet. Maxi shrieked at the top of her lungs. There was a flash of bright light, and the ogre collapsed, falling flat onto its back. "My lady!" A lean knight tugged at Maxi's shoulders. "You must get inside at once. There's a shield protecting the carriage. It's safer in there." Startled from her daze, she whipped around. The knight was staring her down. "Mountain ogres, my lady. Fortune frowns on us, but we have nothing to worry about with Sir Riftan here. Please, get back inside." "I didn't mean to come out. I was thrown." Stammering, Maxi tried to explain. Riftan's stern order for her to stay inside the carriage echoed in her ears. She hadn't intended for this to happen. She hadn't intended to get in the knight's way. The carriage was shaking, and... "My lady, get inside!" The lean knight cut her off impatiently. She stopped trying to speak, silenced by his irritation. He was right. This was no time to be making excuses. She rushed to collect herself, and she had already begun climbing unsteadily back into the carriage when another thud shook the ground. Maxi turned around. Behind her, blood spurted like a fountain from an ogre's cloven torso. She clapped a hand over her mouth, her stomach, already tense with anxiety from the past few days, now twisted painfully. Something sour rose up in her throat. She attempted to push it back down, but to no avail. Watery bile splattered the ground, and her throat burned. "My lady!" Alarmed, the knight wrapped an arm around her heaving shoulders. Maxi panted and clutched her stomach, hot tears stinging her eyes. Something was twisting her insides. "Heavens! Are you all right, my lady?" Maxi gasped for air. The skin patted her back, trying to calm her down. However, her nausea refused to subside. "What happened?" Riftan's concerned voice cut through the air. Maxi managed to raise her head. He was standing in front of the ogre's corpse. Its body split cleanly in two. Without realizing what she was doing, she began backing away from him, even as he stepped toward her. With each stride, he left a dark red footprint on the ground. The long, sharp blade of his sword gleamed blue as fresh blood trickled down its edge. In his silver-white armor, now mottled with crimson, he was nothing short of ghastly. As she retreated from him, Maxi stumbled and placed a hand on the carriage to steady herself. Riftan's face warping like a cloud of smoke before her. The world spun, her vision dimmed, and sounds became indistinct as she sank into the dark depths of unconsciousness. Okay. That is the end of chapter 1. So we will go ahead and read chapter 2 tomorrow. So once again, that is Under the Oak Tree, and it is volume 1 of the novel. And this is the book. It is my favorite book. So we will read chapter 2 tomorrow. I did wave hello to everybody, by the way. Francis, I said hello to. Fred, I said I waved to. And Chloe, I waved to you as well. What? Come here. Come here. You want to come say hi? Come here. Come here. Yeah. Olive. Come here. Come say hi. She tried to say hi a few times while I was reading. Come here. Come here. Olive. Here she is. This is Olive. She's my new reading buddy. Yeah. Hi. Yeah. She's very sweet. Very sweet, very good girl. Very pretty girl. I'm not sure how many chapters is in this book, so these chapters are kind of long, longer than the other book, so I was planning on doing like one chapter a day, and each chapter will be like its own episode kind of thing. Let me try to see how many there is. Yeah, these chapters are pretty long. I think there's some chapters that are like 50 pages. This is just never ending. There it is. 11 chapters. Is that really it? 11? Yeah. Yeah, so this whole book is 11 chapters. So that cut up is some pretty thick chapters. Anyway. So I will be back tomorrow with chapter 2. And this is Olive. Yeah. And I am LadyCodyBug. And yeah, we will see you guys tomorrow for chapter 2. Yeah. I love you too. Bye, everybody.